welcome to St Luke's Church this Wednesday evening. Sorry if you got wet on the way here. I know Gemma was serving refreshments. She got quite wet. It's wonderful to see you. My name's Holly, if you don't know me, and I'm the baby vicar here, vicar in training. I don't cry and make goo-goo gaga noises, but yeah. If you don't know where the bathrooms is, hopefully you saw them on the way in. They're in the foyer. Please feel free to get more refreshments if you need to. We're not expecting any fire drills. We don't have a fire alarm, but there's the exit you came in and through that door at the back and round the back. Okay, that's follow the church warden, Tony. I hope you feel comfortable where you're sitting. We are going to be having some discussion time, so that's why the seats are arranged as they are. And hello to anyone watching online. This has been live streamed this evening, so hello if you're watching online. It's great to have you with us. We have Jon with us, who is going to be talking to us very shortly. And yeah, it's great to be here to think about why our community, why society is fractured, and how we can work together to build stronger communities. So I'd love to invite Jon up and just find out why we should listen to him, who he is, and why he's worth listening to.
Hopefully I'll have a... There we go. How about that sound? Hello, nice to see you all. Lovely to be with you. Hello, hello. Thanks for coming out on what is a slightly wet day. So
Jon, can you tell us what you do as a day job briefly, and a little bit to how you got to that point?
Sure. So I have a career that makes absolutely no sense. I should probably say I'm slightly older than I look. I have one of those faces that doesn't really age. I'll tell you my secrets later. But I have a career that makes no sense. I grew up in Devon, down in Plymouth, and moved to London to be a stand-up comedian, at which I failed incredibly quickly. That's why you're not rolling in the aisles. I then worked as a community worker in the East End of London. Anyone spent time in Newham, which is just the sort of East End? So I used to, there we go, thank you, you're excellent. So I worked there. Then I worked for a while advising businesses on strategy. And you might think, well, how on earth could you possibly help them when you're so young? I have absolutely no idea. But then I spent quite a lot of time working in overseas. So spent time living and working in Kenya, in East Africa, then came back to the UK and set up what was meant to be a really small charity, trying to get kids, young people from all backgrounds to do things in their local community. But it attracted quite a lot of interest. And so the organisation grew from 3 volunteers to 1,000 staff in about sort of 3 years, which was completely exhausting. And I'm not totally convinced I would recommend it as a thing to do with your life. And I spent 10 years doing lots and lots of work, trying to get kids from all sorts of different places from around the country, doing stuff in the local community, going on residential programs, trying to make a bit of a difference. I then got pulled into, I promise there's not much left of this, I got pulled into politics and got asked to be the lead advisor to the education secretary. So the person, if you're fed up with your schools or anything to do with that, it's probably partly my fault. So my job was to advise the person responsible for all of that stuff for about 1.5 years, which was possibly the weirdest job. Everyone in my family is teachers, so they were all constantly cross with me, but it was an amazing privilege. And then about 5 years ago, this is the last step, about 5 years ago, I got asked to set up a new organisation which is focused on knife crime, on violent crime affecting children. And so our job is to try and advise the government, the schools, the police, the youth workers, what works and what doesn't, to try and change the lives of some of the most vulnerable children in our country. But But through all of that, I found, as you can probably hear, I was moving from one very different world to a very different world. And I found that often what was at the heart of some of the problems is people didn't really know each other very well. So the people with a lot of the power didn't necessarily understand what was going on in people's lives. And I became obsessed with the value of actually trying to listen to each other and trying to connect. And my dad was a vicar. I've always been a Christian as long as I can remember. We all have moments probably in our lives when we commit more, but faith has been a massive part of my life. And the church, for its good and ill, is a place where often you do meet people who are a bit different. And so I wrote a book a few years ago about what can be done to try and connect us a bit more as a country, and why have we become so divided. And so that's how I've ended up here today.
Yeah, I read that book after John came to St. Mellitus College where I was studying, gave a fantastic and really memorable lecture that all of my class really enjoyed. I read his book and thought, I need to get this guy to come and speak to us. So here he is, and we're really blessed to have you. Thank you so much for coming, John.
Not sure.
And would you mind sharing your first thoughts with us? We're going to have 10 minutes of input from John, and then we're going to have some discussion time. So if you're not sitting in a big group, don't worry, I'm going to come and sit down here. But over to you, John.
Fab. Thanks, Holly. Thanks so much. Look, if the idea of talking to people is your worst nightmare, if you feel like I've had all day and now you're going to make me talk to people, I'm going to give you a specific thing to talk about, and I'm going to give you far too short a period of time. So it will be like super condensed. But I sort of think it's a cruel and unusual punishment for you to have to listen to anyone talking for too long. So I'm going to say a few things, then get you thinking, then say a few things, then get you thinking. Is that all right? Can we live with that? Okay, brilliant. Well, look, just to get us started, let me just lead with a confession. I was never cool at school, which is a total mystery to me. And when I say it's a mystery that I was uncool, I don't mean it is mysterious that I was not cool. It's very obvious to me that I was not cool. It's more of a mystery. Do you ever read those murder mysteries where anyone could have done it? There's so many possible genuine suspects. Anyone. My uncoolness was like that. There were so many suspects. Was it the fact that I was the son of a vicar? Was it the fact that I had ginger hair? I know you're thinking it. Was it the fact that I had ginger hair? Was it the fact that I used to have a lisp? It's largely gone. Hurrah for me. Was it the fact that I was overly academic and liked learning? Was it the fact that I was absolutely terrible at sport? It could have been any of them. Maybe they all did it together. But the point was, when I was, this is a very exciting light show that I'm having. When I was young, I was really interested in who gets on with who hangs on. When you're not cool, you're kind of interested, you take notes in these things. And I was intrigued about who mixes and who gets on. Now I'm older, especially after the last few years some of us have lived through, lots of people are interested in this question. There was a survey done of British people about 5 years ago that said, look, how divided do you feel the country is at the moment? You can probably think of some of the things that were going on about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. How divided does the country feel? And the most common answer was, I've never known this country so divided. This country has never been so divided. I mean, this is a country that obviously 400 years ago went through a civil war where a quarter of the people died. But nonetheless, that moment just felt incredibly full of division. And I think people answering that question were actually sort of right about some stuff. And the reason I say that is when I look at my own life, I find that I've actually got to know quite a lot of people from different worlds, but often in very definite bubbles, when I'm actually surrounded by people who are really similar to me. I'll give you an example. When I took that job in business, the company I worked for was like a global company. And people worked from all over the world. So you'd sit down for lunch, and you'd be sat next to someone who'd been born in Tanzania, next to someone from the United States, next to someone from, like me, from Plymouth, it was like, oh, wow, we really are, look at us. And there wasn't a single person there who hadn't been to university. There wasn't a single person there, everyone's quite well paid in those jobs, who knew what it's like to really actually count the pennies. And we'd sometimes get caught up, oh, look how internet, look how... But actually, we were a different bubble. There was some work done on this recently, and it found this, that half of those of us, this is sort of having a go at me a bit, half of those of us who've been to university have at most one friend who hasn't been to university. A quarter of those of us who voted to remain in the EU, hate to bring that up again, have no friends who voted to leave the EU. A quarter of those of us who voted to leave the EU have no friends who voted to remain in the EU. Those of us who are retired, the majority of Westerners, as in Europeans who are retired, have, not all, but the majority, have no contact with anyone under the age of 40 in the average week, unless it's someone they're related to. Half of us don't have a friend from a different ethnic group. But the biggest divide of all, by a long way, is actually about money, or people might say class. So if you go to London and you track down a lawyer, I mean, don't stay with them too long, they charge by the minute, but track down a lawyer, and if you ask that lawyer, if that lawyer organised like a garden party or a party in their house or had people around for dinner, how many people of their friends, how many people would they have to invite before they accidentally invited someone who was unemployed? 10? 20? 30? 100. The average person earning that sort of money, and it's not because they're nasty, but we live in these little pockets in a world that we sometimes don't really understand. And I think that stuff actually really matters. That's why I was so keen to come and talk about this tonight and write the book. I think this stuff actually matters, these little divisions. Okay, why do I think it matters? I'm going to give you 3 reasons. You can think about which one of these maybe you care about the most. Maybe you care about one of them and not the other 2. So one is about your head, one is about your heart, one is about your hands. Okay? Your head. If you hate elections, I have really bad news for you today. Going to be another election, okay? Doesn't feel that long. Apparently it's 5 years. Doesn't seem that long since the last one. It's going to be an election. Now, when there's an election, this will happen actually from Friday, the MPs stop being MPs. Actually, you can't put on their emails, I'm the MP for so-and-so. They're not the MP because it's going to be an election. We decide who the MPs are. So effectively, for a period of time, no one's actually in government. Now, the bit that I find quite exciting about this, you may think, oh, you've lost me already. the bit I find quite exciting is there's a moment, it's quite fleeting, there's a moment, apparently it's going to be the 4th of July, when we are in charge. And we get to walk into the little place with the little stubby pencil and do something. I mean, we may not get what we individually want, that's how democracy works, but we get to... Let me come back to that point. Someone said to me the other day about the present Prime Minister, who is richer than the king. Blimey, someone tell me that. Richer than the king. Someone said the problem with the present Prime Minister, and I don't mean this as a political point, you could say this about lots of people in power, the problem with the present Prime Minister, and you may have heard this, he doesn't know the price of a pint of milk. You ever heard someone say that? He doesn't know the price of a pint of milk. I must admit, I don't really care that much if he doesn't know the price of a pint of milk. I kind of care if he doesn't know the price of a hospital, or the price of a school, or the price... But the thing I really cared about is, do the people in power know anybody who obsessively knows the price of a pint of milk? Because they absolutely need to know to every single penny what the price of a pint of milk is, because otherwise they couldn't afford to live. And my mum always said, if you point the finger at somebody, you've got 4 fingers. You've got 4 fingers. I don't know how it works, because really I've only got 3 pointing back at me, but anyway. So I'm having a bit of a go at the Prime Minister, and I think she'd say, well, what about you? And then there's going to be that moment, as I said, where we are the government, we get to choose. And when I get to vote, how well do I actually know the country? If I'm deciding actually what should happen about benefits, what if most people don't know anyone on benefits? Or what if we're voting on what it should be like to run a small business, but none of us know what it's like to run a small business because we don't know anyone who runs a small business? Or we're voting on how exactly farmers should be. Anyone watch Clarkson's Farm here? Like, I've learned so much about farming. Like, how should farming, but we don't know any farmers. I think it's a real problem for a democracy if most of us voting don't know the people struggling and finding life hard in our country. So I think about the head of the decision making. I hope you use your head when you vote, not just, your hand to move stuff. Second bit's your heart. So about, I mentioned I was part of this charity that grew in this slightly sort of extraordinary way. About 10 years ago, the first thing we ever did was we got 60 children it started in London, 60 children right across London. Rich, poor, black, white, from highly educated families, from families who really hated school, all sorts of kids. And we took them away for 2 weeks and lived together and did climbing and kayaking and making stuff and doing stuff, and it was totally exhausting. One of the most intense periods of my life. And I came home at the end of 2 weeks, having not slept very much. And I slept brilliantly. And I got up the next day. I used to live in London at the time. And I got up the next day, and I walked down the street that I live. And the street that I live is actually a really mixed part of London. Lots of people from different walks of life live in that part of London. And as I walked along the street, having spent 2 weeks with this really extraordinary mix of people, I felt two things. Firstly, I felt absolutely exhausted. But the second thing was weird. I felt incredibly at ease. Like incredibly at ease. Like I was remarkably at home. And I couldn't quite put my finger on why I felt this. And then I realized what it was. Every person I was walking past reminded me of someone I'd just spent the last 2 weeks with. And I felt really at home. And they did some research on this. I like research. I'm a complete sucker for research. They did some research, and they tested what's it like when you spend time with someone who feels different from the people you normally spend time with. Right? I don't know I don't go to lots of parties, probably because I talk about research too much, but if I walk into a party, I tend to look around for the people I know. And if I can't see the people I know, I look for the people who maybe look a bit like me, wearing glasses, a bit nerdy. Great. They won't reject me. If I can't see any of those people, I start to feel a bit stressed, right? And they tested this, like how do you feel if you have to interact with someone who feels some way different from you, older, younger, different from people you normally hang out with? And what they found, they took little tests of the saliva of people, and they found something in the saliva called cortisol. Cortisol is this little hormone. It's super useful if you want to get up in the morning, because it gives you a bit of energy. If you're going running, you might get a bit of cortisol. If a tiger attacks you, you will get a lot of cortisol. It's basically a stress hormone. It's super useful for sudden stress. It's really bad for you to have it all the time. Really bad for you. It's bad for your heart, it's bad for your lungs. You do not want to be stressed all the time. It's really bad for you. These people were just sitting in pairs talking to strangers who were unlike people they knew. And they had cortisol. Living in a community with people who you think might reject you or seem somehow different to you, whether that's because of the way they speak, the words they use, how they look, whatever, is bad for your heart. So that's the second reason I like people coming together. Third and final one of these. You've got the head, you've got the heart, you've got the hands. Most people work, when they do work, they work with their hands, right? Whether it's writing an email or lifting something or painting something or doing a deal, we use our hands. How many jobs do you think come through word of mouth? How many jobs come from knowing somebody rather than anything else? But loads. About 40%. Right? About 40%. About 4 out of 10 jobs come from... We actually have a phrase for this. We know it so well, right? It's not just what you know, it's who you know, right? We know this is true. If you come from quite a sort of difficult background in life, and your parents maybe haven't got on, and they can't link you up, what happens if your society's really divided, and you don't know any people who have got jobs? You're going to miss out. And it doesn't matter how well we educate, you're not going to have the opportunities. And said I like research. It's an amazing piece of research where in America they looked at every single person in the United States and what their parents did. And they looked at who are the people who have got on compared to their parents really well. And they tried to work out what's done it, what's caused it. And they ranked all the things that made a difference. What makes a big difference? Some things that made a difference was money spent on schools. That helps. If university's free, that helps. If you've got lots of jobs around, that helps. None of that stuff mattered as much as whether you had networks and connections and you mixed with people from all different walks of life. That is mind-blowing. Like, it's more important to a child's future that they have networks and they meet people doing different jobs than how much money the government spends on schools. That is amazing, amazing. So that's why I care about some of this stuff. Like, living in a divided society is bad for your heart, bad for your head when you vote, bad for your hands. Okay, so what you may be thinking with all this is, all right, fair enough, you have research, but come on, wasn't it always like this? Like, are you saying that once we lived in a society where everyone just was mates with everyone, and that seems a bit unlikely. In fact, isn't it more likely to be true that it's human nature? Birds of a feather, you know the saying? Birds of a feather flock together. Well, if you were thinking that, you're absolutely right, okay? So this is, again, love my little bit of research. There's this amazing chap who decided to follow door-to-door sales. Anyone here ever done door-to-door sales as a job? Ah, hurrah, 2 of us. Okay, I didn't mention it in my career history because I didn't do it for that long, but my first ever job was door-to-door sales, first thing I ever did to earn money. And it's really, really hard work. This guy followed door-to-door sales people in America, and he followed them for about a year to try and see who made sales. They were selling life insurance, who made sales and who didn't. And he found something really extraordinary. He found you were more likely to make a sale when you knocked on the door and they opened it. You were more likely to make a sale if the person on the other side of the door voted the same way that you did. You were more likely to make a sale if the person on the other side of the door had roughly the same income level as you did. This is my favorite. You were more likely to make a sale if the person on the other side of the door was the same height. What on earth's going on? This guy's called Francis Evans, and he worked this out in the 1950s. And he called it something. And when people discover stuff, they like to use Greek because it makes them sound really clever. He called it homophily. Homophily. Those clever Greek scholars in the room will have clocked this. Phily means love. Homo means the same. Liking the same. I don't use Greek that much. I call it people like me syndrome. We have this like small bias towards people who remind us of ourselves. Like me at that party going towards the sort of nerdy people with glasses, probably in corduroy. Like, it's not that we love those people, it's that probably with ginger hair. We go towards them because we think they won't reject us. Now, Francis Evans, this chap, discovered this thing, but he's not the only person to discover it. There's these 2 schools. You can find them on Google, you can go and see them. Schools in Oldham. Right? One is called Breeze Hill, and one is called Count Hill. Right? Super similar schools. Secondary schools, about 700 pupils, and they seem super similar until you go inside. And then what you'll notice is they're subtly different in a key way. Count Hill School would educate nearly entirely children who are white British. Breeze Hill School would educate children who are almost entirely Asian British. Other than that, very similar schools. Now, the local council decided that what they thought they would do is close both schools down, so the buildings are there, but they're closed, and merge them into a new school. The school's called Waterhead Academy, and they brought all the kids together, thinking it's not good for Oldham to be divided, let's educate these kids together. And a group of researchers decided to see how well it worked. And what they did is they found the place in the school where people choose who they sit next to, so they could track friendships. Anyone know where that is? Canteen, right? Because in classes, you get told where to sit. So in the canteen, they tracked who's sitting next to who in the canteen. And they found some super interesting stuff. First thing they found isn't that surprising, okay? The first thing they found was that the Asian British kids and the white British kids didn't sit there together that much. It's not that surprising. They've been educated in completely different schools. This is the interesting bit. They also tracked the colour of the hair of people and whether they wore glasses or not. And they found out that the kids with ginger hair were more likely to sit next to kids with ginger hair. And the kids with glasses were more likely to sit next to kids with glasses. I was personally just delighted that kids with ginger hair and glasses had someone to sit next to. Absolutely brilliant. But the researchers have found exactly the same thing as the guy with the doors, which is people have this small, and it is small, it's not a big thing, but a small bias towards people who remind them of themselves. People like me syndrome. The reason we end up in these little sort of cliques, partly, is because we just have this slight bias towards people who, oh, you feel a bit familiar, you remind me of me. Before we break to discuss something, I'm going to give you some good news. Okay, I've said we're a bit divided. I've said it's actually bad for our head and our hearts and our hands. And I've said that it's actually something that comes from us. Some good news. Good news is, it doesn't always work out that way. So I want to take you on a little bit of a journey to northern Tanzania, so in Africa. And in northern Tanzania, there's a little lake called Lake Eyasi. And on the shore of that lake are the most extraordinary bunch of humans you'll ever hear about, if you haven't already heard of them. They're called the Hadza, and they're super interesting. And the main reason they're interesting is because they're hunter-gatherers today, right now, in the modern day. So what I mean by that is they don't work in factories, they don't go to the office, right? They're not farmers, they're not like, let's sit here, here's my farm. They wander around. And they find berries, and they kill animals, and they eat, and they move on. They're nomadic. Pretty unusual way to live nowadays. That's not the most interesting thing about the Hadza. The most interesting thing about the Hadza is something they do once a month. So once a month, when it's completely pitch black, so the moon is gone from the sky, there's no moon, the Hadza gather together with other Hadza in the tribe who are sleeping nearby. And they perform something called the epem. Now, the epem is basically a dance. I can't dance, so I'm not going to fully be able to show you the... I'm going to have a go, but I feel like you shouldn't rate the epem on the basis of my representation of it. But thank you for your encouragement. It basically works like this. So the men go and hide, and normally behind some trees, and the first man comes out, and he's wearing a headdress, black ostrich headdress, and he's got let me get this right, he's got a rattle in one hand, and he's got a bell round one leg, and he's got a black cape. And he comes out, that's about the best you're going to get from me, and he comes out, and he leads everyone off in this sort of rhythmic dance, and everyone dances together for like about 10 minutes, and then that guy's had his go, and he goes back, and the next guy comes out, and they just keep dancing, and they do this for about 2 or 3 hours, and then they go to bed. And then the next month, they do it all again. Then they go to bed, and they do it. They've been doing this for about 10,000, thousands of years. Here's the question. What do they do? Why? What are they doing? Why are they doing it, right? It plays no part in their economy, right? It's not the way that they get food or berries or anything. It's not part of some set of religious beliefs. It's not part of resolving any sort of argument about who's the best. Why are they doing it? And a group of people decided to follow them, right? To try and work out, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? And they tracked, who do the Hadza, the people in this tribe, who do they trust? How do you track that? Well, they tracked, who do they share tools with? And who do they refuse to share tools with? When it comes to bedding down, who do they bed down kind of near to? Who do they gossip with? They got at, who do these people trust? And they found 2 things. The first was, the first group they tend to trust is people in their like little family unit, okay? So we look at the Hadza and we think it's one group. It's not. It's a series of different families. Quite big families, but different families together. They basically have a bias towards people like them, just like us. Here's the great bit. They have a much stronger bias as to about who they trust. Stronger bias is they trust people who they have danced the epem with. What does the epem do? It builds trust between people who think they're a bit different. We think they're the same. They don't think of themselves as all the same. They see themselves as different groups, and they dance the epem to build a sense of connection and trust. To use our sort of modern way of talking, the epem makes their diversity work. It makes them feel like a group. Now, we don't even have a name for something that connects people together. If I said, aha, there's no description for like a little thing we do to connect people together. So I came up with a word, or two words. I just say they've got a common life. They've got a bit of life in common. They've got a common life. So the Hadza have a common life. It's called the Apem. Final bit I'm going to say, then it's over to you for a bit. The truth is, we need more common life. We need more places where people connect together. And to make the point, I'm going to do the whole of human history in about a minute, okay? I might miss a few bits out, okay? The whole of human history in about a minute. So human history basically is 3 Fs. First F, foragers or hunter-gatherers, foragers, people collecting berries and stuff. The Hadza still do it. Everyone used to do it. Foragers. That's the biggest amount of time, actually. Second F, farmers. People used to do farming, right? We settled down and started farming. Third F, factory workers. That is most of human history. We were foragers, then we were farmers, then we were factory workers. In each of those bits of history, if you look for it, you can see a common life. So you can't find any point in human history where we were foragers that we didn't have something like the Apem, some sort of ritual, and you can find it in the archaeology, some sort of coming together. And when we were farmers, you can find in the history other places where people came together. You start to see religious practice used as a way of doing this. And for us, obviously, our experience of that, most of us will be church. But you also see rites of passage. So you see people going to weddings and going to funerals and starting to have like baptisms and things to bring the community together. And this is like a big thing. So if you were a 14th century, if you were like 700 years ago, peasant, in England, you're spending one day, at least one day every week, doing some sort of feast day, some sort of rite of passage, some sort of covering together. Final one, factory workers, probably our grandparents, great-grandparents' generation. They were brought together by a completely new set of things, like the workplace. You don't really have a workplace when you're all farmers. Suddenly you're going to work and you're mixing with people. Or your kids are going to school and they're mixing with people. And then the final, most important one, our ancestors, our great-grandparents, our grandparents invented something called the club. All the clubs you might think of, like Guides, Scouts, Boys' Brigade, Girls' Brigade, they all date from about 100 years ago. And people would mix with people who they didn't know. They'd move to the city, it was terrifying, and they'd mix with people we don't know. The reason we've become a bit more divided isn't because we've fundamentally massively changed. I've always had this little bias. The reason we've become less divided is people go to clubs a lot less. If you look at every generation since the Second World War, every single generation is less likely than the previous one to join the club. And you can track it. You can see the declines. And as a result, we've just become a bit more fractured. Now, in a mo, I want to go on to, okay, what can we do about it? But just what I want to do is ask you, just turn to the couple of people next to you, maybe say hello, and then where here in Maidstone do people mix and meet other people? Where do you see it happening? Is it the school? Is it a particular group? Is it a club? Where does it happen? It could be something you do, or it could be something you know other people do. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. It's not very long. Go for it. Okay, 10 seconds, final thoughts. Okay, let's come back together. Let's got this wrestling a bit. Like, this stuff is not easy. Where to find these spaces where you genuinely actually do talk to people who might feel at first a bit different. I want to, just in this next bit, talk a bit about why does this matter to a church? Right, and why does this matter to a person who's following Jesus? And so if you're here as a visitor or that doesn't describe you, hopefully you still find it interesting. But I just sort of recognize everyone's super, super welcome here. So let me just start a little bit with what I think is an absolutely extraordinary story, which is the story of how Adolf Hitler, didn't expect me to go there, probably, Adolf Hitler desegregated, removed the division, desegregated the United States Army. This is not a story that many people sort of tell, but let me have a run of it. So if we go back in time a little bit, so 1944, it's coming to the end of the Second World War. I'm going to go to June in 1944. December 1944, so right at the end of the year. So we're coming to the end of the war. So if you think about the end of the war in Europe, the Allies, America and the UK particularly, have landed in France. Absolutely pivotal, heroic moment in the war coming to an end. And they storm through France. They zoom through France at actually amazing pace. And they storm so fast that what would be called the supply line, the line that gets people fed and provides the equipment, starts to get quite stretched. But they're storming through France. And Hitler is pretty worried. And he's right to be worried. And he decides to do something that he always would tend to do, which is, if in doubt, raise the stakes. And he instructs his generals, who are already under attack from the east, from Russia, to launch a surprise attack on the stretched supply line of the Allies. And the German generals think it is utter madness. But Hitler says, I don't care, that's what we're going to do. And on December the 14th, 1944, 405,000 German soldiers attack the Allies' supply line. And it's such a mad thing to do, the Allies are totally taken by surprise. And on that day, at 5:44 in the morning, the Battle of the Bulge begins. And the man who is responsible for the Allied forces in Europe is a guy called Eisenhower. Goes on to become president. And he is in serious, serious stress about this. And he says, we must get more men to defend the supply line. And that his sub-generals say, we have sent every man we can find to defend. We must get more men. There are no more men. We must find, this goes on for a while. There must be more men, eventually. Okay, there are men that we haven't deployed. Deploy them. We can't deploy them. Why not? Because it's illegal. What do you mean? We've got trained men that we're not legally allowed to deploy to defend the supply line. There's a unit of African Americans who are trained to fight, but they cannot be deployed because the US Army is segregated, like the southern states were segregated. And so it's against the federal law. This is within within my mum's lifetime. It's against the federal law for African Americans and white Americans to fight alongside each other in the middle of a war. And Eisenhower says, I don't care. We're going to break the law. And any African American who wants to fight in the front line will be allowed to fight in the front line. And he gives the order. And on that day, the law is broken. And a group of about 2,000 incredibly brilliant African American soldiers volunteer. And they join the attack, the defense. And units are formed of white and black soldiers to live alongside each other, to fight alongside each other, and to defend the supply line. And the Battle of the Bulge, in time, is won. And the war in Europe comes to an end. 2 years later, A man called Truman is president of the United States. The war is over. Truman says, it's time to desegregate the US Army. They're all being trained. This is ridiculous. The end. It's time to desegregate, to end the division by race in the US Army. And a secret survey is taken of American white servicemen about how they would feel about the desegregation of the US Army. And the majority of them oppose it. 70% of white servicemen back in 1947 oppose the desegregation of the US Army, apart from one unit. There's one unit where 93% of white servicemen actively support the desegregation of the US Army and would like it to happen as soon as possible. Who are they? They're the men who fought in the Battle of the Bulge in the combined unit. What changed their mind? No, it wasn't talk. They lived in a place that was full of racism and division. It wasn't preaching. It wasn't talk. It was living and doing stuff together. They had an extraordinary common life experience for those 2 weeks. And it changed their view. And they made them realize how much they had in common with these men. If we can bottle just 1% of that experience, I don't want to bottle the other 99%. I don't want us to go and fight on the front line. What is it we should take from it? I think there are a few things. The first one is intensity of experience. What is it that makes us feel we have something in common? It's doing something intense together with somebody else. And psychologists have looked into this. And the reason it works is if I ask you, tell me who you are, and you were super, super honest, not just I'm this age, but you might not tell me that. Anyway, I'm this age, I live here, I've got these kids. If you're super, super honest, you'll probably tell me about moments in your life that defined you. Maybe it's a marathon that you ran. Maybe it's illness that you recovered from. Maybe it's the loss of a loved one. And you'll think of the people who were there with you at that time. You might have a snapshot in your mind. They were the people who were there with me when I got married. They were the people with me on the day of the funeral I dreaded. Those people help you think about who you are. They define a sense of me. And if you share intense experiences with people who you might originally think of as different, you tend to think of them as actually quite a lot like you. That's why sport bonds people together. Intense shared experiences make a difference. My experience of that as a Christian is sometimes a home group, like a really amazing home group. And actually, we haven't climbed a mountain, but I found I could share something that to me, felt like a big deal. And I remember the people who prayed for me. I remember the people I was with. And it changes my sense of who is like me. The second one is way, way gentler. It's routine. Those soldiers marched together. They ate together. They did things together. If you would dismantle your rifle in a very routine way, you build your rifle up in a very routine way. For some odd reason, when you do something in routine, it builds a sense of trust. Why do armies march? Have you ever wondered this? Why do they march in this sort of slightly, it's a really inefficient way to get somewhere. Get in a car. The reason they march is marching in a routine way builds a sense of connection and trust. Routine builds trust. Very, very odd. Why do we feel a sense of bond if we eat with someone, if we break bread with someone? It's a sense of routine, for some odd reason, makes us think, you did this, I did this, we've got a connection. Routine is the second one. Third one, final one. Quality of status. If you go to a prison, we were talking about prisons earlier, if you go to a prison, prison guards, prisoners can have some intense experiences, and they definitely follow routine, but it doesn't mean you have high trust between the two, because there's no equality of status, nor should there be in a prison. But if you want to build connection, equality of status, everyone feeling like they have equal value in the space makes an absolutely colossal difference. So what we're looking for, ideally, is an institution, a place that really, really, at its heart, believes in the essential equal moral worth of everyone. Ideally, a place that thinks what makes you valuable is that you are loved and who you are, not what you did previously. A place like that would be quite good at this sort of stuff. A place that has intensity, a place where, as I say, people might share their stories or go through life together. That would be great. And the third is a place that might have routine, maybe through the way communion is done, or the way in which people sing together in unison. What I'm trying to get at is that a local church can't solve all the problems of the world. God can do that, a local church can't. But actually, local churches are surprisingly well set up for some of this stuff. It doesn't mean it's easy. I'm not trying to say it's totally straightforward. But actually, churches can be remarkable places for people to connect. My dad, as I said, was a vicar. My church was a place where I would meet people of all sorts of different ages, and they'd treat me with respect and would joke together, and people from really different income brackets. And we didn't cover all differences, but we had some that meant that you could connect, and I think it can make a colossal difference. Let me finish with why I care about this so much as a Christian. One reason would be I care about that stuff I was saying, about the head and the heart and the hands, and I think we're meant to be stewards of this creation, and actually having a place where people vote well feels like good stewardship of the creation. Having a place where people get fair access to jobs feels like good stewardship. Having a place where people don't feel anxious all the time feels like good stewardship. But it's more than that. I mean, for some of us will care passionately, quite rightly, about evangelism. You know, the Bible says to go and make disciples of all nations. It's really hard to make disciples of all nations if you never know anyone from a different nation. Right? Go and make disciples of all Maidstone. Well, if you don't mix outside of our little clique, it's blimey difficult to try and do that. It's incredibly hard. So I care about it from an evangelistic point of view. But then, finally, I care about it because of the man I'm trying to follow. Like when I read about Jesus in Scripture, he doesn't look like he's surrounded by people just like him. He's friends with the tax collector. He's friends with the prostitute. He's saving the life of the centurion's daughter. He's having followers who are some of the people who clearly haven't been picked by anyone else by the age that he's picking them. He's not picking necessarily the brightest and the best, but he mixes with the brightest and the best when he goes to the temple. He moves between different lines, and I would like to be a bit more like him. I don't mean that all of my friends should be nothing like me. I've got to talk to someone about geeky politics stuff, right? But I would like to be a bit more like Jesus in having some of those lines divided. So the final thing I want to do is ask you to have a think. What could you do? And let me just put the bar unbelievably low, because this is a nice evening and I don't want to make anyone feel at all uncomfortable. Here's some of the things I think people can do. If you always read one type of newspaper, whether online or every now and again, read one that you think has opinions that you hate. Just every now and again, once a month, read a different point of view. And try and see if you can not agree with it, but understand where the person might be coming from. That's not that difficult thing to do. The other thing is, if you always walk a certain way from A to B, walk a different route once in a while, and just see a different side of Maidstone that you might not always see. What else could you do? Here's 3 that I've pushed myself on. One is, you might be saved yourself and protected yourself from social media, or you might be completely addicted to it. Those who are on social media, change who you follow a bit. Like try and add people who have different opinions. Quite an easy thing to do. Join something. Again, a bit harder, not suggesting everyone should do it, but I said clubs are places where people mix. Places as Christians we can get to know people too. Join a club. Go 4 times. If you hate it, stop going. Pat yourself on the back. Well done, you. You might love it. Keep going. Don't keep doing something you hate. Go 3 or 4 times. Quit if you don't like it. Final one. You may already do this. Once a year, invite your neighbours round. Not all of them. Like if you've got a street of 200 people, that's ridiculous. Unless you want to do it, okay, it's brilliant. But it can be just 2 or 3. But try not to cherry pick the best ones. Right? If you're only going to invite 2 or 3 people around just for a glass of bubbly, of some sort of lemonade, or whatever it is, either pick them at random, get some dice, or just pick people who are nearby. Okay? But once a year, invite 3 people around, 10 people around, whatever number suits you. 3 things you can do. But keep the bar low with these. I'm not trying to ask you to give your life away. I'm just saying, can you think of one little thing you can do? So I'm going to hand it over to you. There are some Post-it notes somewhere in your group. So I'd love you all to take a Post-it note and scribble down one thing you could do. If you're horrified you really don't want to do anything, Commit to, in 3 years' time, read a newspaper that you disagree with. And if you're lucky, you'll have forgotten it by then. But see if you can think of something you could do. I'll give you a few minutes to do it. And once you've done it, once you've done it, would you mind sticking it on this work office, this thank you. This lift chart, somebody works at safety. Stick on this lift chart over here, that'll be brilliant. to finish off. If you want to have a quick look at what's up there, I'm sure you can, but we'll just say half a minute and then we'll reconvene. Okay. I'm going to share just one final little story because I really love it. And then I want you to just, in a moment, just have a think about what could the church do? Like, what could this church do? And again, if you come to the church all the time, that's great. If you've never been in this building before, that's great. If you know what it's like, presumably, to live somewhere, and so that place may well have a church. What could a church do? And if you come to this church all the time, what could this church do? That's a great example. So I'm going to let you work it out more, but there we're already off and running. So this is brilliant. Thank you so much. You've made my day with that. Thank you. So in a moment, I just want you to talk in your groups, what could the church do? But just before we do that, let me just share a little story that I think gives us a sense of hope, of like actually how people do end up connecting across divides. Who here hates football? Who here loves football? Okay. I think you'll like this story either way, because if you hate football, it shows how fickle football fans are. And if you love football, it's kind of slightly about football. So you'll all be absolutely really happy. So there's this brilliant thing that these two guys did, where they got together a load of Man United fans. So if you love football and you hate Man United, also great. If you love Man United, also great. So this is how it worked. They got together this group of Man United fans, about 100 of them, and they got them to volunteer to take part in what they said was like an experiment. And they called the first one forward, so they left the other ones behind, and they brought them up one at a time. And this is what they did. They said, just before we do the experiment, which takes place in that building over there, can't tell you about it, but it's in that building over there, just want to ask you a few questions. Is that right? Yeah, no problem. Okay, first question. What is it you really love about Man United? Okay, how long have you been a Man United fan? Tell me, who are some of the greatest Man United players of all time? Great, that's all I need. Fantastic. If you wouldn't mind just proceeding over to that room over there, that's where the experiment would take place. Off goes the Man United fan. Now, secret, the experiment does not take place in the building over there, right? So the Man United fan's walking along. While he's walking along, someone comes running the other way, who's also part of the experiment, and they fall over. Now, the question is, does the Man United fan stop to help up the person who's fallen over, which will make them late for the experiment? There's a twist. A third of the time, when the Man United fan was walking over, the person who fell over was wearing a Man United top. A third of the time, they were wearing a Liverpool top. If you know nothing about football, Liverpool and Man United fans do not like each other. That's the important matter. And a third of the time, they were just wearing a general red top. Man United and Liverpool tops are all red. So, okay, everyone happy? Now, this is the experiment. The experiment was, who do they stop to help? Well, what they found was they were significantly more likely to help the person wearing the Man United top. You may have guessed that bit, right? Here's the bit I really love. For the last 50 fans, they just changed it a bit. They said, I hear you're a football fan. What is it you like about football? Tell me, when did you become a football fan, and how did it happen? Who do you think are some of the best football players? Great, would you mind going over there to the room where the experiment takes place? Exactly the same. A third of them, someone ran past in a Man United top, a third a Liverpool top, and a third a red top. What do you think happened? So, they helped the Man United, guys wearing the Man United top, just as much as before. They helped the Liverpool top, just as much as they helped the Man United top. And they hardly helped the person wearing the red top. Why? Because you changed the frame of how they saw themselves. So rather than seeing themselves as a Man United fan, they saw themselves as a football fan. Our identity, how we see ourselves, is actually really, really remarkably malleable. And so if I say, think of yourself solely by the decade in which you were born, and we talk about that, and then we go out to meet some strangers, you will probably bias towards the people who are roughly that decade. If I say, tell me about where you're from, and that becomes the thing. If I say, tell me about the books, this is why I was interested in getting books that you love on here. Tell me about the books that you love. And I point out, this person read that book too. Oh, we're amazingly malleable at finding connection. I said we have a small bias towards people who remind us of ourselves. Lots of people who might seem different can actually remind you of yourself if you can find the thing you have in common. Just a slight encouragement that sometimes these divides that exist in our society, it's not like the world is full of difficulty and sin, right? You're not going to suddenly get rid of it all. But actually, if you can just find something people do together and have in common, that's why intense, and the common life is brilliant because people do intense things together, or they do routine together, and suddenly that's the thing they have in common. Just to encourage you, these things can actually move and change. What I'd love you to do, with the people near you, what could a church do? What could this church do? And I'm just going to give you a few minutes just to chat about it and think about it. And you may want to think, where does the church already do it? And it's just actually doing it a bit more. But what could a church do that would mean that people who are a bit different would more easily connect across Maidstone? Okay, be imaginative. See what you come up with. A few minutes. Now I might ask people to share some ideas. Just one more minute. Just one more minute. Okay, let's see if I can interrupt your wonderful conversations. Pull us back together. Oh, brilliant. Okay. What ideas did people come up with? And as I said, the brief was, can be anything, can be as creative as you like, can be as small as you like, so please don't think, oh, my idea's too small, or my idea's too big, or someone's already tried it. Whatever it is. What do people come up with that they can share? Just to get us thinking a bit.
So something that we do here is Cafe and Tots, where it's like a toddler sort of coffee morning. And we were saying that it's very mum-centric. So we were saying that maybe we could do a dad-centric, sort of have a bacon butty sort of instead of tea and cake.
Yeah.
Or they can have tea and cake, but you know. So make it more like aimed at the dads, so we've got actually a better, have a different variety of people coming in the doors. Because it's very, very mixed bunch of people that we get.
Something to build on. We used to have at a church, before I moved to a new part of the UK, we had a men behaving dadly, which was exactly what you're describing. And it was so well branded, it was marketed brilliantly, because it was like, hey, men of the church with small children, or people that, not in the church, would you like to come here and get free food, pretty cheap or free food? Your kids play together, and we'll look after them and make sure they're right. And when you get home, your partner's going to think you're an absolute legend. It's like, this sounds amazing. Why wouldn't I want to be there? And so, who else had ideas? They could be big, small, doesn't really matter. Thank you, Brill.
We have a men's group. We're just talking about the men's group that Phil kind of leads. And mixing that across churches and maybe sharing that. It's kind of an idea that's been vaguely muted, but I think would be a really good thing to do.
Great, thank you. Who else? Let's just go for it, and it would be lovely to hear each other's ideas. Brilliant.
I think maybe any opportunity to share food, because one of the things we do really well here is sharing food together. We have barbecues, we have pancake parties for all, across different ages. There's always different things that go on with food. And there's always cake. And Susan was saying that a while back we did door-to-doors and we gave out like Valentine boxes of Maltesers.
Oh, wow.
And that's all about food.
Yeah.
And, food is a common language.
Yeah.
And actually, we could do so much more with it. I'm not really sure what, but it's a great way of involving every age group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant. We did a sort of team bonding thing for a corporate once, which was about, they did a sort of ready, steady, cook. And they had to cook together. They had a limited amount of ingredients, so they'd cook in a certain time. It was absolutely hilarious. And they came out of it really sort of a sense of togetherness. And then they ate the food. They ate together. Yes, please, go for it. You had your hand up, I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm trying to think what to say. Yes, because our church group is very small and elderly, and we do need to change our outlook dramatically if we're going to encourage younger people and families. We had them 40 years ago. Ours was a young family there, but I was saying to this lady, they've moved on, they've moved away, and we seem to have not been able to encourage. So we've got to think of changing our services, which would encourage people to come, because life has changed, music has changed, the way you talk to people has changed. And we've got to think of it like that as well. But in this context, I was just thinking, we're out of the village where I live, we're down a lane, down a hill, so we're not central and easy, although we do have a toddler group. But I think whatever we do, whether it's a concert, a talk, or something, to bring people in, because I think there are lots of people where we are that sort of see the church as it physically is outside the village.
That's really interesting.
And got to somehow give that sense of, no, we're part of doing things that people like to do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a brilliant reflection. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's fantastic. Who else can build on that or share something they were talking about? Thank you.
I think particular interest groups is a possibility. So There used to be a photography group, for example. There was a group of probably predominantly retired gentlemen called The Shed, because men like going to the shed, and they went off and visited various places around, and maybe music groups or things like that.
It's brilliant. That's a brilliant idea. And that's also really using like homophily or people like me syndrome to work to your advantage, because it's like, oh, I like photography, I'll come. But you might find the people who also like photography might in another context see each other as, oh, you're different ages, different stages. Oh, it's brilliant.
Just a lonely people's club.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. There was a piece of, back to me loving research, a piece of research done the other day that showed that being, feeling lonely, which isn't necessarily the same as being alone, but feeling lonely was as bad for you as smoking 10 cigarettes a day. And so it gives a sense of actually it's quite a heavy burden people can carry. So that's brilliant. Thank you. And the most lonely age group, did anyone pick this up recently? 18 to 25, or 18 to 30, it's that age group. And I think we think it's always people who are older. Actually, I'm not saying loneliness can happen to any of us at any stage, but actually that group really can struggle. That's a brilliantly interesting statistic. Yeah. And what I've found in work around loneliness is you find that people actually long to be part of something, but they're very scared about being part of something. So how do you make people feel like people like you will be there? You will be welcome. You'll have something together. Thank you. That's brilliant. Yeah, I think you were going to come in.
There's a cafe in Maidstone, Cafe International United, something like that. And it's all for foreigners to all go and get on together and just all share their experience and just have a drink. Brilliant. Just trying to get a sense of community.
Yeah. And again, a very interesting example of like people like me actually crossing boundaries. Like we're all foreign. Well, that's like we're all from completely different countries, just not this one, right? I mean, that's an incredible amount of difference. Yeah. Anyone else got something they were talking about that they wouldn't mind sharing? Doesn't matter how big or small, it's always nice to hear an idea.
University of the Third Age has about 40 different interest groups, ranging from archaeology to local history to recorder club to Spanish, languages, bridge, you name it, they've got it. And but it requires somebody to lead the group and put a bit of effort in. That's the only thing I'd say. And we're all so busy. So.
Great. So if people want to join something and that's a thing they could do, that's brilliant. Thank you. So you were saying cat cafe?
Cat cafe was something I've come across in some places. You fill up a cafe with cats as well. So people who love cats, haven't got one at home, go in there and just pet them, and so they they buy cups of coffee. So
absolutely brilliant. Why not? There we go. That's an idea we weren't expecting. Absolutely fantastic.
Hi, good evening. I work at the local authority with my colleague Alexa, and I have a role that's in community safety, so I'd be interested to have a chat with you about knife crime.
Of course,
when we have a chance. But I think for me, as somebody who's not part of a church, I think it's about, we were just chatting about the fact that there's an analogy in leadership where you say that my door is always open, but that implies that the person has the courage to walk through the door in the first place.
Right, yeah.
So actually, kind of moving away from the myth of people standing on egg boxes with megaphones and shouting with their hand on the Bible, actually just taking the empathy and the love that you have into the community in general without it having to be on your terms and without it having to be in this beautiful building would be massive for the communities in Maidstone.
Yeah.
We run a youth club, a youth hub I'm very proud of in the mall called the 326, which you'll be familiar with because the 3 till 6 is the hours that the town centre becomes the surrogate parents for the children of the borough, because that's where all of our schools are. And we didn't want them hanging out in Brenchley Gardens or outside McDonald's or inside McDonald's. And we thought about turning the Wi-Fi off, but that doesn't matter anymore because everybody's got data contracts, so we don't have to. That doesn't work. And we put those screaming things up and it just caused arguments because my officers just claimed that they could hear them just to see if they could sound younger than they actually are. But what we decided to do was we needed to provide more guardianship and more spaces for young people to be young people in a world where they are, as you say, the loneliest, the most fractured because of the pressures that they're under.
Yeah.
So the 326 is a youth hub where we invite all different groups, and we would actively encourage you guys to, if you wanted to come in and deliver a session or come and do a group in that space, because essentially it's a space where young people walk in no matter what uniform they're wearing, what background they have, what class they're in, as you said in your talk, where people can come in and just learn about a different way of life, and maybe it will tick boxes for people, and if not, it will just educate people to be a little bit more sympathetic to other people's ideas. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I do think, like, those of us who are members of churches can sort of underestimate what you've got. Like, because if you're switched on, you'll spot things that aren't working or things that aren't quite right, or of course you should do that. My experience of working more with central government than local government is communities that come together, that people have relationships and can do things like a local church, can be amazingly valuable to try and make things better. And government longs to find ways to do that. And I think sometimes the church is a bit, they wouldn't want to engage with us. I actually think you should talk to, as far as what you're saying, you should talk to the local authority and see if you can be combined. Not on everything, right? You probably don't want to collect the taxes, but right, there may be things you can do. Say it again, sorry.
Litter picker from the congregation already.
Right, there we go. Yeah. Anyone else sitting on something they think, should I say this? Should I not say this? Now's your moment. Don't go home thinking I should have done.
Just following on from what you're saying about young people and loneliness, I've been volunteering with Shout, which is a crisis text line. And so if anybody's thinking they would have a heart for listening to these lonely young people, but going out and doing it face-to-face in your town centre feels too risky, have a look at Shout, because it's all done from in your own home at your own computer, including the training, and it's very flexible with the timing. So you just have to do 2 hours each week once you've done the training. It's easier to get into, and I have learnt so much about people whose experience of life is very, very different from mine. We call it listening, even though it's by text. Yeah. Listening with empathy and not being judgmental towards these people. Yes, they're not all young, but a lot of them are. Some of them are so young and feel so alone, even in families, that there is nobody that they think accepts them or cares about them. It may be misunderstandings, it may be the truth, but they need somebody to hear them.
And what impact has it had on you doing it?
It makes me really reevaluate my own relationships, and it makes me notice how I'm behaving towards some people. When I hear what these young people are feeling like, when they felt really judged and rejected them, I start reviewing the way I'm behaving to other people and thinking, could I be making somebody feel like that? And then when I'm walking around coming home from school time, I make even more effort to try and meet the eyes of any young people and smile at them, which is a scary thing, because these days you'll get told off for grooming them or something. But they need somebody to look them in the eye and see them and smile. Yeah, I think that's so wise. And the thing that I've spotted is every time in life I've sort of moved to spend time with a completely different group of people, whether that be some of the children who are sort of most struggling in life, who can sometimes put up quite a sort of front because they've had so much sort of bad stuff to deal with, or dealing with some of the most sort of wealthy, powerful people. I find this incredibly common insecurity and vulnerability and anxiety to all of us. Yes,
and we don't realise.
Insecurity, but not a common support network. Time and time again, I have to question my assumptions. Things that I assume that everybody would have access to, that they don't. Yes. It's extremely humbling. Yeah, thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. Any final thoughts for anyone? Please go for it, and then check anyone else.
Just one thought. There's a social prescribing website that covers the Maidstone area. It's called Connect Well West Kent. And on their website, they've got 600 to 700 organisations listed in the Maidstone locality, and you can search on if you want to join a guitar club in ME14. You put your postcode, you put guitar, and it will tell you where the club is.
Oh, wow.
It's an amazing website. So it's Connect Well West Kent.
It also makes me think if a church wanted to set up a group, it could advertise it on there. Yeah. Brilliant. Anyone else got something they're like, I probably should say this before I go home? I don't want to rob anyone from an opportunity. Fantastic. Oh, yes, go for it.
Is it cats?
Very quickly, last 2 years I've been going out walking a lot because I've stopped working. And I just go out for a walk as often as I can, at least once a day. And I see people as I'm walking around my local neighbourhood, and I smile at them. Or sometimes if they've got a dog there, I'll just make a polite, nice comment about them. And you get a lot of interaction, and it's just a way of just making people feel less lonely.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Fab. Holly, back to you.
Yeah, I think that leads us really well into maybe some questions that you might have for Jon. He's got us to do quite a bit of work thinking about where the mixing pots are, what we could do. Do we want to ask him some questions? You've heard if you've got questions about being a door-to-door salesman or a comedian, he's got lots of experience with different walks of life. But I'm happy to run around with a microphone if you've got questions for Jon.
Do you think that in society now, one of the biggest problems is poverty? When I was growing up, I didn't come across people living in tents or begging in the street or going to food banks. And I think the difference between the haves and the have-nots seems so wide now that people are struggling, even though they're working, to put food on the table, to pay the gas bills and things like this. And they feel sort of disenfranchised from the rest of society. They just feel marginalised.
Yeah. I always wrestle with the have things got worse sort of question on most of the things I care about, because I'm struck that we sometimes remember things as being slightly better than they were. When people were saying this is the most divided time ever, I was thinking of the poll tax riots and the miners' strike, and I was like, they felt pretty bad. We seem to have sort of slightly forgotten that, and we're not that long off. I'm talking 70 or 80 years, but people having outdoor toilets, there not being any real good provision of welfare is not that long ago, and so I tend to come at it slightly, and it does depend which stat you look at a bit as whether things are getting worse or better. I tend to come at it as, are things bad, rather than are they getting better or worse? I think things are bad. Like, there is a level of deprivation that some children in this country grow up with that is pretty horrid and pretty shocking. And I think that there's a level of sense of hopelessness and despair that some of the children in this country grow up with that poverty is an absolutely essential part of, but it's not the only burden they carry. And the thing that in the work that I tend to do around the young people who end up carrying a weapon and using a weapon, that the common factor is that no one really, they don't really feel like anyone in the adult world is on their side. And they don't really feel there's anyone in the adult world they really trust. I was meeting with some children the other day, and I said, how many of you have an adult you can trust? And this kid basically cut in and said, I don't trust, there's no adults I trust, there's no one. There's no one I would turn to. And this is a child who's been taken into care. His family situation's obviously been very, very difficult, and he'll have been fostered a number of different times, and he feels that there's nobody for him. I mean, that is bleak. And the reason that children, why on earth would a child carry a knife. You know, why on earth would a child be violent? I think the worst tragedy a human can experience is feeling that they don't matter. And poverty obviously sends that message, but so does the sense that no one really notices if you got up in the morning. No one's able to check that you've been fed. No one actually chased up when you didn't go to school. And you feel a sense of not mattering. And most of us would do anything to convince ourselves that we matter. I mean, that's partly the reason why people do, in a very different way, people who are often very, very unhappy work extraordinary hours for large amounts of money, and they've got more money than they ever need, but they keep on doing jobs they hate because it's their one sense of, I matter. And children who have no place will turn to people being afraid of them as a way of saying, I matter. And I think the poverty of not mattering is probably the worst. And there's some children who are statistically very, very poor, but they're going to be okay because they have a family situation around them in the midst of that is going to give them a better day. And some children are very, very poor and don't have that, and I think that's appalling. So no, I'm pretty worried. I'm also an optimist by nature because I think we can change these things, but we need to be really clear-eyed about the fact that child poverty is serious in this country, and we have to invest money and do things to try and fix it. You might want to come back at some of that.
Do you, I'm interested in your opinion about how we deal with mental health and young people. Are we over-acknowledging it? Are we encouraging it? Or are we not recognising it enough? I mean, we've got a lovely park here, and every year there's a suicide, or more than one suicide, amongst young people. And I do wonder if we've kind of made it a thing to have, and that it's okay. But then the other thing is you want people to talk about it, so I'm not really sure if we've got it right.
Yeah, I really agree with the sort of premise of your question. I think there's two separate things that we need to sort of do at the same time, which is really hard. So the first thing is we need to recognise there genuinely is a decrease in teenagers' mental health. And the reason I say that, because if someone says, oh, I've got a mental health, I feel, how do you know that it's actually a change, rather than people just talking about it more? I think the place you look is self-harm statistics or suicide statistics or suicidal ideation, people thinking of suicide. Those numbers have been going for the last sort of decade in the wrong direction for children, particularly girls. And so I think it's right to say there's a serious thing happening with regard to teenagers' mental anguish, anxiety, depression. I personally have a view on what's driving the change. You know, your question was about change. This is a place I'm confident saying something has changed. I think it's social media and smartphones. Now, let me be really careful in what I'm saying here. I don't think the number one cause of all mental health is social media and smartphones. I think if you have a situation where you're neglected and abused as a child, that is probably the number one cause of serious depression and mental health. But we've had that for ages in our country. The thing that's changed is the smartphones and the social media. And I think it's particularly bad for girls, which is what we're seeing in the data, because social media encourages you, turbocharges comparison, particularly the more visual sites, and so it makes you constantly judge who you are by how you look compared to other people. I think that stuff is I'm really concerned about it. I also think, though, I'm not convinced we're helping by turning everything into the language of mental health. So I think it's, when I was look, everyone thinks something best when they were kids, but we used to talk about worrying. Worrying is an activity that you do a bit more or a bit less of, but I wouldn't want to describe someone as a worrier. And I slightly think it's good to be able to say, I'm having like a day when I'm feeling quite worried. I'm worrying today. I'm feeling worried. And maybe it's okay to say, look, I'm having a day where my mental health feels... I worry about when people say, I have a mental health problem, and it becomes part of your identity. And I do think that's difficult. A bit like I wouldn't want to encourage someone who had some other sort of health issue that is partly environmental. So if, for example, I stop running for a very long time, I will put on weight. That's how I work. But if I said, I am someone who has a bit more weight than I want, and that is my identity, I think that's not great. Things change and move. And I worry about that language. And I do think teenagers long to feel they matter. And if having a mental health condition is a way they can say they matter, I think that is a risk, and we have to be a bit careful of it. So I'm trying to sort of do two things at the same time. I think there's a genuine problem, and I think we're in danger of using language that makes it a thing that you're meant to identify with.
Good at doing is coping strategies, and I agree with your, the term. I mean, I've got 5 grandchildren, and the older ones will say, I'm feeling really anxious. Why are you anxious? Oh, because I've got an exam coming up. No, you're worrying.
Yeah,
that's normal.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be. You know, it's okay to feel that. It doesn't mean that you've got anxiety.
Yes.
We all worry about stuff. It's normal, and I think we're not very good at saying, well, actually, that's a normal emotion.
Correct.
And you don't need to see a counsellor. You don't need to see a psychologist. You don't need medication.
Yeah.
Actually, what you need is to learn strategies to cope with it.
Yes. And you don't need to believe it's a permanent condition. I think that's the thing. Because I'm quite pro, children and adults talking to therapists. Sometimes it can be really super helpful to think, oh, that's interesting. I tend to think about it like this. And people often in my world call it coaching. You have a coach at work. It just helps you think. That's great. The problem is you think, I've got a permanent situation here. Well, no, you've got an exam in 3 weeks. Being worried is a normal thing. It's like a reasonable
and
response.
If you're not, actually, that's a bit more worrying.
Yeah. I think that's the difficulty. Fab. That was a good workout for me on a couple of things.
I think we'd love to hear a bit more about your day job, Jon, about the prevention, youth knife crime. Can you tell us what your day job is like?
Yeah. So the core of the let me tell a little story just to explain it. So in the early 1980s, there were a group of prisoners in a prison in New Jersey in America. The prison's called Rahway Prison. And these prisoners were on life terms. So they'd committed murder. And they decided that they felt they should try and give something back. Like, it's too late for them, but they could try and give something back. And they formed a little group. They called it the Lifers Group. And they wrote to the governor and they said, look, we would like to try and do something to improve things in our community. Could we help? Is there some way we could do something? And the governor was quite a sort of forward-thinking person. And they said, okay, well, how about we give you the chance to tell people who are in your position when you were teenagers what you know now? And to sort of say, look, these are the mistakes I made. Don't make the mistakes I made. And so they brought some young people who were sort of heading in the wrong direction to meet some of these men, and they shared their stories about where they'd gone wrong and what they'd done. And the young people were sort of interviewed afterwards and said, look, this has transformed my life. This has changed my life. This experience has changed the way I think about things. And it was such a remarkable thing that these guys did that it started to spread. So other prisons run similar programs where children whose lives were heading in potentially the wrong direction would visit the prison near them, meet some of the people who were on life terms and hear how their life had gone wrong. And they made a documentary about this. And the documentary won an Oscar. Like, it was called Scared Straight, and it won an Oscar in I think in the 80s. And it spread right across the US, and it was something that actually Republicans and Democrats loved. You don't get that much nowadays, and it went everywhere. Then, that happened until somebody decided to do what I would call a test. And they decided to properly test the impact of the program. And so, if you ever remember doing science at school, you have to apply the treatment, so you get some children to go who are visiting the prison, but you find another group of children who didn't visit the prison. And you follow them both and see 15 years later what the impact of the program is. And then you can tell how it works, how well it works. And this experiment was run, proper test. And it found something amazing. It found the program had a really significant effect. It made children more likely to commit crime and violence. In one area where they tested it, it made them 25% more likely to commit crime in the local area. So money was being taken out of taxpayers' pockets to fund children to go and do something that made them more likely to rob and mug and do something in that neighborhood. And that had been happening for decades until someone did a proper test. And even then, the people who ran the program said, well, we don't believe the test. So they had to do another test. And eventually they convinced enough people that actually they should just listen to the science rather than just the stories. That program used to be a bit more common in the UK than it is now. And now it's very rare because someone worked out that actually it was significantly harmful. Now, if you take medicine from the doctor, you kind of expect someone to have tested it, right? You kind of expect there to be a proper test where some people, and normally they'd test it on animals beforehand, or they'd find some other way of testing it beforehand. Some people take the medicine, some people don't. They did the same thing with the vaccines to see if they actually work. Lots of stuff that's done for vulnerable children to try and keep them safe isn't tested. We just believe it works because we're adults. And because there's an amazing story, and the people running the program are really good people, and they can tell you how good it is, and they can find some children who will tell you it's changed their lives, and everyone goes, this is amazing. That's not okay. We wouldn't take medicine like that. It's not okay. And so 5 years ago, I was asked to set up a team of people to fund a load more tests, to try and understand what works and what doesn't. And then we do our absolute best to try and persuade people, from government to opposition, to people running schools, to people working in the police, to people working with children who are arrested, to please stop doing the things that actually don't work, and perhaps pause doing the things that we haven't yet properly tested, and do more of the things that actually work. And so we're always pushing for more mentoring, like children getting mentoring and the relationships. It doesn't work for everyone, but it does work. We're, for these children, we're really in favour. This is an example of me being in favour of therapy, but making sure children understand it's a temporary situation, it can be addressed. Therapy can make a real difference to a child who's got involved in carrying a knife or violence. We're really in favour of police being around locally and knowing the neighbourhood and areas where children get involved in violence. And we're really opposed to children visiting prisons. And also we're opposed to boot camps. That's the other thing people sort of instinctively think is great. If you can take the children and give them sort of a military sharp shock, it will sort of sort the problem out. And we'll say to them, you know, you're bad, but we're going to fix you. The problem is they hear the you're bad, and they don't really hear the it's going to fix you. And again, when it's tested, it leads to more crime and more violence. And so I spent this morning meeting the Home Secretary to try and, who's probably about to lose his job, his last meeting, to talk through what the evidence says. And we do as much as we possibly can to try and... My basic view in a nutshell is I don't want to be soft on crime, and I don't want to be tough on crime. I quite like to be smart on crime. Like, I don't go, well, the trains are late again. Let's be tough on trains and sort them out, tough, and punish them, punish the trains. Well, let's hug the trains. And then, why don't we just do the stuff that works to make the trains turn up on time? And I feel the same thing about keeping people safe. Do the stuff that works.
Oh, thank you.
That's the day job.
That's great.
But it's nicer to be here talking about other things.
Has that provoked any more questions, hearing about what Jon's doing day to day? So I'd check.
Yeah, we might give you the gift of time and stop 2 minutes early.
Yeah, that would be very unusual, wouldn't it? Could we please give our thanks to Jon for being with us this evening?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister?
No. That job looks like a really hard job. No, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for coming and spending the evening thinking about these things. I'm going to say a prayer for us because I'm a vicar and I do that sort of thing. And that's what I've learned from my vicar who's sitting over there. That's how he gets away with it. So let me just pray for us and for our community and for Jon. So Lord, we thank you that we could be here this evening. We thank you for all that Jon has shared with us. And Lord, we pray that you would help us to love those around us, especially people that are different from us. With these insights, we pray that you would shape that part of us that seeks to gravitate towards people just like us. And we pray your blessing on our community. We pray that you would bring healing and wholeness to the places that are hurting the most. Would you help us to work together? Help us to bring lasting change and flourishing to all people. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.